Now on to Chapter 19. These first couple of weeks we have laid a foundation of learning, and now we move beyond the present to the future. And I want to note here the way that verbs provide specificity to the Greek language as well as other inflected languages. Notice the column on the left, the Greek word, and then the middle, the tense and voice, and the translation. In one word, look at the specificity that Greek provides, from I love in the present to the perfect passive, I have been loved. A good deal of meaning is encoded in verbs, and that's why we have a whole semester on verbals, this second semester of Elementary Greek 2. There are 6 tense form listings in the lexicon. You'll notice these in mounts this week. So if you look in the lexicon, there's first the present active, and then the future active middle that we're going to look at today, then aorist active, perfect middle passive, and aorist passive. Those are listed in the lexicon in the back of mounts for the 50 verbs, or the verbs occurring 50 times or more, rather. And that is an extremely helpful chart. Mounts notices it, and I want you to make sure that you're aware of that. As we head into the verbal system and looking at the various tense forms, I mentioned a couple of weeks ago that we begin with the present, but in some ways that is unhelpful. We begin with the present because that is the lexical form. If you go to look up a word in the dictionary or lexicon, you look in the present active indicative. But the stem of verbs in the present active indicative or others is not necessarily the root, and that's what we want to begin to distinguish now. You will notice that there's a feeling throughout this course that you wish you knew more earlier, and there has to be some kind of progression. We have to start somewhere, and we start with the present. But here we begin to make some clarifications. The verbal root has the meaning of that word. That is where the meaning is at. It's the verbal root. The various tense stems specify the meaning. The verbal root has the meanings. The present active stem specifies it in the present tense form and active and so on, future, and then the aorist that we'll deal with soon. Let me just note this. The aorist stem is most often identical to the root. That is the tense form that is most often identical to its root and the root. This will make sense further, but I want to show this chart today. This chart is actually in the next chapter, chapter 20 of Mounts, but I want to show it to you today to just have you thinking about it as we go. So, to the future active indicative. You know already the present active indicative, and you know the primary tense form endings. Well, the future adds a tense formative. How do you know it's the future? The sigma. It's underlined there for you. Here, luomen becomes lusomen. That sigma after the tense stem before the connecting vowel signals it's a future. It's a sigma. Gives us a future active. So just keep an eye on that sigma. The personal endings, again, o, ace, a, amen, ete, use, or usin in the active and primary endings. Note again the third plural, nsi, becomes usin, but remember the actual ending is nsi, and then the middle passive, my psi, which ablouts to a, the iota subscripts there, tai, methasetha, and tai. We remember the paradigm of the present active indicative. Here this is just review again. Luo, lues, lue, luomen, luete, luusin, and then what does that look like in the future? Luso luces, luce, lusamen, lusete, lususen. Just follow that sigma. Do you see it there all the way through? Well, let's deal with the middle for a few moments. The middle indicative in the future uses future active tense form, but the primary passive personal endings. The my, psi, which changes to a with the iota subscript, tai, metha, setha, and tai. So here, por usamai, por usamai, por usamai, por usamai. And you see the sigma. Again, the personal endings, you'll want to just know these, be able to say them at 4 in the morning if you're woken up. Always say amen ete usi, usin, no nsi in the third plural, my psi, which is a, tai, metha, setha, and tai. And that will help you so much if you can just have that down. Paradigm again of the future middle, my, psi, tai, metha, setha, and tai. And just with the a there, notice the second singular, por use. The sigma in the personal ending drops out. The alpha lengthens to an eta. The iota subscript's underneath, por use. Most often, if you see a long vowel at the end of a word with a circumflex over it and iota underneath, you're thinking second singular verb somehow, and then you can go from there if it's a verb. So just keep that in mind. We deal with contract vowels as well that lengthen before their tense formatives. Remember, contract vowels end in alpha, omicron, and epsilon. Their stem. So if the alpha is the end, then it lengthens to an eta. Epsilon lengthens to an eta. Omicron lengthens to an omega. Agapa becomes agape. Poe becomes poe. Plera becomes plero. And then the sigma and the omega. The number of things that we're looking at this week, and it seemed like all these charts have a triplet form to them, and I recall you to first semester of class in elementary Greek 1, where we learned labials, velars, and dentals. The labials, p, b, f. The velars, k, g, k. Kappa, gamma, key. Labials from the lips, velar from the throat, dental. The tongue touching the back of either the front or back teeth to form t, d, and th. What happens when those meet this sigma in the future? Well, there's a conflation that happens, a crashing together. The labials become psi, the velars become xi, and the dentals, they just drop, and the sigma sort of wins the day. So remember these patterns in the square of stops when a labial, velar, or dental meets a sigma. The master verb chart, this will be something you just need to commit to memory. We looked at the present last week, and here the future active and future middle. And the words in the first singular paradigm, luo, luamai, luso, por usamai. Vocab Starter this week. Keep in mind, sometimes the more creative you are, the more likely you'll be to remember these things, and you just need to remember them. That's the way vocab is. But I think if you use the method of having a bridge, some sort of a word that gets you from the lexical form to meaning, some word picture, some story, some image that will prompt you either by the way the lexical form looks or sounds or something it reminds you of personally. I suggest doing Not vocab cards that are 3 by 5 necessarily, though if you'd want to, breaking those into quadrants so that you have actually 3 or 4 quadrants, and we'll look more at these even the next couple of weeks. But memorizing the lexical form, we'll talk more about beginning to memorize the verbal root as well. Perhaps you could put that on one quadrant, those two things on one quadrant. The next quadrant, the bridge. And then on the back side, if you split that 3 by 5 card in half, or if you want to have multiple cards going for one word, whatever it would be, but then the definition and the lexical form again. So the lexical form, basileus, makes me think of basilica. And think of basilica, a large ornate building, sometimes almost a temple. Think of kings in the ancient world having a basilica of some kind, basileus. Genao, generate, I beget or give birth to. Genao, genao. Zao, zoo, I live. These are just starters, and you can progress further on your own. So this is chapter 19, thinking about the future.